ゴジラが近づいております。警備隊の指示に従って避難してください。
We are getting some truly extraordinary live images here in the studio.
Approximately 7 hours ago, something attacked the city. I don't know what it is.
Welcome to Tokyo Lives, a giant monsters podcast where the hosts truly believe that something will rise from the ocean and destroy us all. I'm Coleman.
I'm Kyle.
And I'm really excited about today's episode. Doing something a little different, kind of, I don't know, what we said this podcast was going to be for in the first place. Mm-hmm. Not just reviewing those giant monster classics, but talking about what makes them tick. And what shaped the industry at large. That's going to be
Definitely
the main topic tonight. We're doing a little something different, which I'll explain here in a moment. But we're going to get into some news first before we move into that. Not a lot of news out there.
Yeah, this week was pretty devoid of new news. There wasn't really much going on, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I've been posting different articles and things to the website. If you haven't checked that out, TokyoLivesPodcast.com. I post whatever news I can find on giant monsters or giant monster related things, and I've found a decent crop. I think I've got a few pages on there now of updates and news items for movies and some books and comics and stuff. So I really like updating that, and I think people are starting to get something out of it. So that's pretty cool. The most recent thing I want to talk about that I just posted on there is kind of a blast from the past story where Atlas Pages, I think is the name of the publication or the publisher, they're putting out a new novel called King Kong versus Tarzan.
Yeah.
And you, before we started the show, thought this was a little silly.
Yeah, just a little bit. I think that it just seems very strange. I mean, of all the crossovers that you could do, I mean, I get it. I guess Tarzan's, the king of the apes or whatever, but it just doesn't really appeal to me. Like, what? So you're dumping him on Skull Island and
No.
having him interact with Kong? Like, I mean,
The opposite, actually. I don't know if it's I think it's the story they're going with this one. There's like an old story and a new story, but the story they're going with this one is that Kong is captured again from Skull Island, taken to Africa, and he's let loose on the African continent, and Tarzan has to track him down.
Okay, because the thing that I read was the original, where it was a prequel to the original Kong, and it was just Tarzan interacting with Kong on Skull Island.
That was the original story, yeah.
And that sounded really silly to me. I mean, this one kind of sounds a little silly because it's like, okay, wait, so they captured Kong again? But isn't he dead?
Well, it's like dead? An outside. So this is, I think, an interesting story. This is why I want to bring this up. It is silly in basis, and I like Tarzan. I'm not the biggest fan. I used to watch some of the older movies with my dad and stuff. But this is interesting just because in 1933, after they came out with King Kong, it was obviously hugely popular, huge blockbuster of a movie, and they came out with the sequel, Son of Kong, which I don't know if it did as well or if it was as big, but still the franchise was strong. They wanted to keep this going, but into Son of Kong, Skull Island is blown up or sunk, and Kong is dead, so there was really nowhere to go. So the producers and the owners of King Kong, they wanted to continue this some way, and their thoughts were doing a prequel of sorts, which that wasn't even a big thing in the 30s. That was a new concept. They wanted to do a prequel that had Tarzan go to Skull Island and interact with Kong, and it was moving forward. They were going to do this movie. It was going to be a big, I don't know if it was going to be an RKO picture, but they were going to do Tarzan versus King Kong or King Kong versus Tarzan, and it was going to be a big blockbuster. They couldn't get the rights from Edgar Rice Burroughs for Tarzan. So it just fell off the edge of the map. So I thought that was interesting. So now, to coincide with the Legend of Tarzan, the new Tarzan movie, which I don't know, I haven't got a feel for it from the trailers yet, really. It looks like it has some apes in it that aren't as good of CGI as, like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and stuff.
The apes CGI is a little bad, and I mean the actual action of the film looks good, but it's just something's off about it, and I can't place it. I
like that they're doing the story of him being civilized and coming back to lead a tour through the jungle. I
Yeah,
think that's awesome.
Although I could have done without the origin story if they were going to do that. But anyway, that's
Yeah.
But yeah,
Neither here nor there. But yeah, but they're coming. So they're bringing this story back, and they finally have the rights to do it. And they're going to do King Kong versus Tarzan as a novel.
Yeah.
And I would check this out. I mean, it sounds cool. I mean, Tarzan running around Africa trying to capture King Kong. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it?
No, yeah. I'm gonna.
Do you know what I'm referencing when I
No
say
idea.
familiar? Do you remember our little screenplay competition back at Full Sail?
Full Sail screenplay
Where I
competition.
wrote, we were going to take a classic Godzilla monster, like
Yeah.
one of his enemies, and write like a Hollywood reboot of it.
Oh,
and my
yeah.
pitch was a Titanosaurus movie taking place on
That's
Africa.
right. Yeah, that's right. Now that you mention it, now I completely remember that. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to read it. I mean, I may be like sitting here like I'm not too interested in it, but I'm still going to read it. I think that the thing is like, and this is something that to tie it into Skull Island, it's something I am a little worried about. Is that I enjoy Kong whenever it's kind of like the story of Kong.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean, like the traditional story of Kong. So I wonder. One, what Kong are they basing this more off of at this point? Are they basing it off of 33 Kong? Are they going to base it more off of Peter Jackson's or?
I would assume like a generic conceptual Kong. This is our Kong.
Because it just like Peter Jackson's Kong showed a lot of emotions and stuff, whereas 33 Kong was basically just a monster. So it'll be interesting to see what route they go with that, because I don't know if they're going to do. And this is what I'm worried about a little bit, actually, is like, so what, is Kong going to kidnap Jane? And that's going to be like the thing? Is like, he's going to, it just seems like it could be a little on the nose.
I worry. I think the thing I would worry about is that I would assume, since Tarzan would probably end up being our perspective as the audience.
Yeah, I would assume so.
That it would just go wild, and like Kong would just be this feral beast, and he's trying to tame it. I don't think it'll go much deeper than that, but I thought it was an interesting concept, and I like this idea of like these film ideas or these concepts from the 30s coming back and finally being made complete. I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I don't think we'll ever see it on the actual screen, but I think it works as a format of like a book or a comic. I could see it getting adapted to a comic, actually. Like recently, that's been kind of a cool thing that's been going on. Is books will come out, and then a couple of years later, there'll be a graphic novel released adapting it. So I could see that happening, and I would be down for that, depending on how good it turns out, I suppose. But
yeah. So moving on, that's really the only news item we have for tonight. I mean, there's some other things going on with Power Rangers and some other things, but we will save that for when there's actual news.
Yes, yeah.
And hopefully we'll hear something Shin Godzilla related soon. Big fake out with a magazine being published recently.
Yeah, for those that aren't paying attention to that too much, yeah, there was apparently in Japan there was a magazine that was about to be released for Shin Godzilla, or where there was a Shin Godzilla article, and since it's so close and to the release in Japan, a lot of people just automatically assumed that there might be at least something new in there. But it turns out someone who got the magazine early over in Japan has already responded and said, no, it's the exact same poster image, and it's the exact same information we all know. So it's a little disappointing. I mean, I just want to see like a trailer. I want to see an actual trailer. Like the teaser trailer supposedly isn't even footage from the real film itself. So it's just,
Do you think this is time to go into a little chaos mode? I mean, do you think they're not showing us things because the production was disastrous? So, like, they don't have a good movie on their hands?
I don't think that's the case. Now, I'm not saying they do have a good movie on their hands, because I have a lot of problems with the production in itself, but I think that the reason why they haven't shown anything is because they're literally not ready to show anything. With them doing more CG effects in tandem with the monster effects, I think they're of the belief that they want to get everything ready to go before they actually show the monster on the screen. Like, they don't want to show, like, just the suit effects, and then when the movie releases, it's got the CG add-ons. Like, they want to show it all. So I think that's why we haven't really seen anything.
They're cutting it close, though.
They are. They're cutting it real close, and that is concerning in itself. Is if they're cutting it this close, like, are the effects going to be done well, or are they going to have to rush them at the end? Which some would say that's exactly what happened with the Attack on Titan movies, is that some of the effects are subpar because they just ran out of production time and budget. And
Not to mention, they're going to have the kind of marketing time that, like, 10 Cloverfield Lane did. I mean, they got 3 months to push this money on... I guess it's a small island, Japan. You don't... Word of mouth isn't too hard.
Yeah, and I mean, we still... And that's another big thing, too, is we still have no idea about an overseas release. And I wish they would come out and at least say that much. Like, oh, well, we'll release it, in August or something.
Or just so we don't have any information this time. Like, tell us something.
But there's just nothing. Like, they created an American poster, but it's on the poster it says releases in Japan on blah. So it's like you would believe that means that, okay, well, they created an American title for the film, so that should mean that it's going to go somewhere. But how, when, why, that's stuff that they're not talking about yet.
I will say that I don't want to have another episode where we talk about how there's no news for Shin Godzilla. So,
so yeah, we'll move on.
But we did have a little fake out there with that magazine, so that's annoying. So moving on, we've got a lot more activity on Twitter, and the Twitter post I'm going to talk about right now is from the same Twitterer as last week, but I promise we've got other Twitterers now. There's a lot of Twittering happening.
Tweeting,
back and forth,
if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
tweeting?
some tweeting.
Tweeting. That would be the
that's the word there.
Pop culture phrase. So anyway, from James Arledge, who we had talked about last week, he had asked if we're going to be getting into much H.P. Lovecraft stuff.
Right.
And I wanted to bring this up on the episode because I love H.P. Lovecraft and I want to talk about him.
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is, from my side of things, I would say not much. I mean, there may be some stuff that we will talk about. Like we were talking right before we started recording about Dagon specifically, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, he is the more giant monster-ish creature of the Lovecraft universe, I would say. I mean, Cthulhu himself is a giant monster, but as I have fought with Coleman many times, the fact that you never see him kind of takes him out of the running.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, so let me lay this out. So I am the H.P. Lovecraft fan on the show, and I would say there's plenty to talk about giant monsters with it because, Dagon, I bring him up specifically, not just because he's a large alien monster, because there's plenty of those in the Lovecraft universe, but because his short story specifically was about a guy who lands on an island and is confronted by this giant monster. Like it's a flat out giant monster tale, whereas the other ones are like mysteries and suspense thrillers. There's an actually straight up giant monster story in Dagon.
Yeah.
But with Cthulhu and all the old gods, they are all giant alien monsters.
Yeah.
And they do have a physical presence. Like Cthulhu, I understand in the past, like all our fights and arguments on him have mostly been about how like people go insane when they see him, and the concept of him, it causes insanity and all this thing. But he does have a physical presence. He is sleeping somewhere under the ocean, and at some point will wake up and cause the apocalypse. So he is a giant. He is a physical giant monster.
But where's that apocalypse movie? Like, give me that Cthulhu.
There's been just like Godzilla and plenty of other giant monsters. There's been comics written about him actually waking up. There's been books written about it. Just because the original H.P. Lovecraft stuff is more about the idea of what will happen when he wakes up. There's been plenty written since then about him waking up and cities burning and everything else.
Well, maybe so. Maybe we will talk about something about that. Maybe, but I don't see that being a theme. Is what I'm trying to say. Like we may talk about it. We may have an episode devote. Actually, that's what I would suggest. Is we have a Lovecraft episode where we talk about Dagon, we talk about like all of the things combined into one episode, because I feel like you could have a whole separate podcast just talking about Lovecraft, and I'm sure there are podcasts out there talking about Lovecraft. So, I feel like, yes, it's in our wheelhouse to a certain extent from your description of it, but I don't think that we'll full on like do like 4 episodes about one episode about Dagon, one episode about Cthulhu, you know, like
just like any other subject or any other series that might have conceptual things that are giant monster related. This isn't an H.P. Lovecraft podcast. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there's definitely things there that we could reference if we do another Versus episode. I think Cthulhu could 100% show up. These are things I think in the future. H.P. Lovecraft's more popular than ever. I think there's going to be more new media related to that will be very giant monster-esque.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, like I said, it is definitely possible. I just don't see that we're going to focus on it for an extended period of time. Like you said, he'll pop up in every once in a while. Like, we'll talk about Lovecraft, we'll talk about Cthulhu, but it's not going to be like I'm going to talk about Cthulhu every episode. Not that that's what the tweeter wanted, but we will probably talk some stuff about it. But don't expect that anytime soon, I would say.
We've got a pretty busy schedule from what we've planned for the next few episodes.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff planned already out for a few episodes now. So, stay tuned. We will talk about it at some point, though.
Yeah. So I want to move into our main topic of the night. So let's jump into it.
The monster will destroy us all.
Prehistoric monsters.
The monster will destroy us all. The monster will destroy us all.
Prehistoric monsters.
The monster.
This monster you think your bombs will stop him?
All right, so tonight we are trying something new, and I hope it's going to become a staple on the show. This is going to be our first Versus episode.
Yeah.
And I guess what this means is in the future and tonight, we take a concept or an idea or literal monsters and pit them against each other and come up with a winner. But the trick is we're not going to be the ones who choose the winner. You are. So we are going to have our arguments. We're going to pick a side on whatever the topic is, and we're going to make our best case for what we think and who should win. And then in the comment section of this episode being posted on our website, TokyoLivesPodcast.com, the comments will 100% decide who the winner is. So that's up to you guys. You guys got to get on there, jump in, put in your 2 cents, and whoever wins, wins. And we'll put it up on the website, and we'll talk about it on the next episode of the show on who the winner was, and it's going to be completely audience voting based.
Yep.
So looking forward to that. So tonight's topic, if you've seen the episode title, is we're going to be talking about special effects techniques, importance to the industry, to the genre. We're going to be picking a side, and the 2 sides to choose from are stop motion animation as used in films, not just flat out animation films, and suitmation,
yes.
The very kaiju Eastern special effects technique that is still extremely relevant to today.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I will be arguing for suitmation, and my friend Coleman here will be arguing for stop motion. So I am actually going to let him start it off, since technically stop motion came first. So he can we're going to do it. You can do your opening argument, and then I'll go straight into mine, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. And I think my opening argument is a bit of a history lesson, which I was really excited to getting into this and diving deep. But you were 100% right. Stop motion is one of the oldest techniques in Hollywood. At around like 1885, 86, there were short films made where like matchsticks were jumping around, lighting cigarettes on fire, and some of the earliest stop motion things put on film. But it wasn't until a little after the turn of the century that you started getting filmmakers who were, making creative projects and telling stories, who started using these in films. And one of the most famous early ones was Willis O'Brien. Willis O'Brien, of course, made a ton of short films and things that just making dinosaurs come to life. And he ended up working on The Lost World in 1925. Super well known. Blew people away. First T-Rex versus Triceratops ever put to film. Black and white, completely silent, but amazing film for its day. And because of it, he went on to work on King Kong. I mean, King Kong was one of the greatest stop-motion films ever to be made, and audience could not believe that they were seeing this ape run around, grab people. You had actors and Kong in the same frame. It was incredibly fluid animation. and it was unbelievable to people. This is why Kong is such a huge blockbuster, is because this ape had personality. It came to life, and this was because of what Willis O'Brien was doing. He actually had a lot of people who wanted to become like a protege to him. They were really excited, but a young guy named Ray Harryhausen kind of caught his eye with one of the short films he made, and he just started learning from him. And when they got to another Kong-esque film, which brought back not only one of the lead actors from King Kong, but the producers, the director, just like half the cast and crew were from Kong, worked on this new picture, Mighty Joe Young, in 1949. And it was interesting because you had O'Brien, who was the lead special effects artist on it, but most of his contribution to it was taking care of problems that would arise, or technical problems, or just the creative overall goal of it. And Ray Harryhausen, even though he was young, barely starting out, he ended up doing about 85% of the actual stop motion animation of Mighty Joe Young, and it's unbelievable. It still holds up today if you take it out. And obviously, Ray Harryhausen went off to do the very well known Sinbad movies. He would do Jason and the Argonauts, Clash of the Titans. I mean, these are huge films that push stop motion even further. And going into the 70s and 80s, you have ILM, George Lucas's special effects company, Industrial Light and Magic. They started using stop motion and a new technique of stop motion in Empire Strikes Back and the Star Wars trilogy. I mean, this was huge, seeing AT-ATs walk across the Battle of Hoth and being a big part of the battle with you have ships flying around and everything. It's all stop motion. It's amazing. It really, even in today's, I mean, those movies have been more watched in modern times than any movie from the 70s, and people still believe it when the AT-ATs are walking across the screen. You have the AT-ST walkers in Return of the Jedi, but it wasn't until you got to like Raiders of the Lost Ark and RoboCop that you're starting to see stop motion get to the point of like real believability. And this is in big part because of, I told you I had a little bit of a secret weapon I found in my research leading into this episode, and that's the idea of Go Motion. Go Motion, who was a big supporter of it, was Phil Tippett, who tried to pitch legendary director Steven Spielberg on using it for Jurassic Park and the dinosaurs. Go Motion was stop motion on crack. It was basically, where stop motion from all the way since the 30s was done with scales and rulers and hand movements to move these models and make them move realistically. Go Motion would use computers and robotics to move the models themselves, which would then be supplemented by the classic hand movements and techniques. So you really got some of the most fluid looking animation, unbelievable stuff from Go Motion, which was used as reference models for Jurassic Park and the computer animation models, and a lot more than I actually thought before I got in my research. A lot of the computer animation models from Jurassic Park were these original Go Motion setups that they then scanned, and then they added maybe some muscle caricature and some other things, and it was just unbelievable. So you have these modern classics like Terminator, RoboCop, the pre-production of Jurassic Park, that were using stop motion up until a couple decades ago. And if you want to go even closer than that, the new Star Wars Force Awakens used a nice little reference stop motion in its little chess scene, referencing back the original, how they did that with the very Ray Harryhausen type chess pieces running across the board. So this is not really a dead technology. It's technology that's been replaced by very similar technology, just like many things have moved more into the computer age. But stop motion, I think, has a incredibly rich history in Hollywood, and no one's not going back and checking out these films. These films are still standing the test of time. They're coming out on Blu-ray, and people are showing them to their kids. So these are very personality-based special effects techniques that I think really hold up.
Yeah, I would agree with most of your statements.
Okay.
But I will get to that when we get to the middle of this situation, because I need to introduce Suitmation to everybody. All right, so really, Suitmation is best described it's used. The term is used whenever the term puppet does not apply, since the puppet is being worn by an actor, and when the word costume does not apply, since the costume is also being controlled by a puppeteer. That is the difference between suitimation and just a dude walking around in a goofy alien costume back in the 30s. Because there was no puppeteering going on, that does not count as suitimation. But what does is, I'm going to go modern starting out, movies like Alien, movie like Aliens, Predator, all these big movies that, like you said, stand the test of time and people are showing them to their kids. Technically, that counts as suitimation because all the facial work in those creatures, everything to do with their tails or appendages, is being controlled by puppeteers. So by definition, they are suitimation. Now, to go back to how suitimation really, really kind of got started, is going back to the other big boy of cinema, which is Godzilla, specifically giant monsters, I suppose. Back in 1953, whenever they were coming up with the idea for Godzilla, they wanted to do stop motion. But unfortunately, Japan did not have a Ray Harryhausen or a Willis O'Brien to do their effects. And they were struggling, and they realized it was going to cost way too much money, take way too much time. So they came up with the idea of creating a suit for an actor to be inside of, and creating models and miniatures and all sorts of crazy stuff around him, and having that be the way they portrayed the Godzilla effects. So they created, specifically, his name is Eiji Tsuburaya. Basically, he was the one that came up with how the technique works. Okay, so the guy's in the suit. How does he walk through the water? How does he interact with the environment around him? What speed do we film him in to make him look like he is larger? He was a special effects director. He was basically the guy behind all of 1954 Godzilla. He was behind the Ultraman series. He was behind all this crazy stuff that has these wonderful effects. And yes, some of them do look dated as you get further into the 60s, 70s. The reason for that is because Toho was actually struggling with their budgetary restraints, essentially. They kept trying to do more and more, and unfortunately they weren't able to meet their budget, so they had to cut back on some things. So whereas the suit may look really nice, the miniatures do not. And the biggest thing with suitmation is that it really does, and I know stop motion does this as well, they use a combination of effects, like you were saying in your opening argument. You have the actors superimposed with the stop motion creatures. They had to do that a lot with suitimation because you have a giant, like a guy walking around in a giant monster suit destroying buildings. Anything that is like human oriented has to be actually filmed somewhere else and then superimposed. So it's the same kind of technique, actually. But one of the things in 54 Godzilla, and I bring this up because this is a really unique take on this, especially for it being such a new technology, is there are moments where the Godzilla suit comes above a building and there is a flat model of a building. And instead of just putting fake glass inside there like they would do in stop motion, they actually, each individual window was superimposed with a shadow, like basically just a person standing behind glass, like looking up, trying to look up in fear. And those are the kind of things that stop motion really wasn't able to do. Now, the effects in suitmation, like I said, especially if you're talking Toho, Japanese stuff, they really did kind of fall by the wayside after a certain point. However, in the 80s, whenever Godzilla returned, they actually really focused down on the 85 movie and really brought those effects to the modern day. And there are scenes in Godzilla 1985 where the suit really doesn't look like a suit. Especially in the next movie, Biollante. Some of those effects stand up to even some of the worst, the bad CG that we see in modern blockbusters sometimes. I still feel like those sequences with the suit stand up against them. And then, of course, you have the evolution of suitmation, which is something that is being used in modern day films. Like, you have, for instance, Where the Wild Things Are is a really good example of suitmation being used to really good effect. You have the people walking around in suits, but the faces of the creatures are being created with CG. So Suitmation really works as an add-on. Like, you do something physical so the actors can see, and then you change it later, which is exactly what happened with Attack on Titan. And as we were speaking of earlier in the episode, Godzilla Resurgence is going to use a combination between techniques. But here's my secret weapon. My secret weapon is a little thing called motion capture. Because motion capture is literally an extension of Suitmation. They are not wearing a physical suit, but they are being adjusted by puppeteers, aka the
I will
effects people.
go ahead and lay down the law right now.
You don't think that counts?
You don't want it to count.
Oh, I do. You want to know why?
No. Because if you say that motion graphic, if you say that that what Andy Serkis does is an extension of your argument, then I get CGI in general.
I would disagree with that.
It's an animated.
I would disagree with that.
Special effect to do. It basically modern day matte and CGI special effects are literally almost the exact same process as rear projection stop motion effects. So if you want to continue into the evolution, I'm going to win pretty fast.
Because I'm going to use motion capture, but not in the way you may think. The reason why I'm going to use motion capture is because of the fluidity of movement. And that is something that stop motion was never, ever, ever able to do, is fluidity of movement. Because no matter what, there was always something that made it look jerky. There was always something. Even when you go as far as go motion. The whole entire reason why they went with the CG effects for Jurassic Park was because it was still jerky. Like, there's no way to avoid that. I don't care what animatronics, like you have the computers fill in the gaps, it doesn't matter. It still looks jerky. And, that is actually a thing with the original Kong. I love that movie to death, but once you know that the way Kong's hair moves is because it is a stop motion creature, it does lose some of that effects work because it just doesn't look right anymore.
But just to keep this civilized and structured, we have to admit that motion capture and modern day CGI are new effects. They're not stop motion, and they're not.
No. They are
Suitmation.
new. Like I said, it's an extension of Suitmation. I'm not saying that it is Suitmation. I'm saying it's an extension. Just like Godzilla 2014 was created using motion capture effects, and Godzilla 98 was not. You can definitely see that there is a similarity in how the creatures move compared to their Suitmation.
Well, yeah, you can
originals.
see the seeds, but it's not the argument. It's a completely different technology.
No. I'm not arguing for Suitmation because of motion capture. I'm saying motion capture is a technique that is used today that is an extension of what Suitmation was.
Seeing what was created because of the technology you're fighting for, that's a perfectly valid argument.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not going to fight saying, "Oh, Pacific Rim is using more Suitmation than you." Yeah, no, I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am trying to say is that, look, it is a matter of preference, and I know we're going to still get into our individual arguments, but I think that the 1954 Godzilla and its effects are more effective at telling the story that it was trying to tell than the 1933 Kong's effects were at telling its story and what it was trying to do.
Wow.
And I think that, yeah, exactly. And I think that if Godzilla had been stop motion, Godzilla would not have continued into the modern day. Godzilla would have been a one-off movie that would have happened, and nothing would have ever come of it ever again. I think that Kong is the exception to the rule, because Kong is the only one that has really connected into the modern day. Most of those other, even the Ray Harryhausen films, other than, I guess, Clash of the Titans, but I don't know if you could really even count that, because, they didn't use an extension of what they did before. They just kind of went off and did their own thing.
What do you mean?
Like, the effects work. I'm talking specifically the effects work for Clash of the Titans. Like, there was never any reference back to, the other stuff. I don't know, but I'm rambling.
I mean, it's a classic.
I'm rambling.
Yeah. Clash of the Titans is classic stop motion. Like every creature in that is stop motion.
I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that the Kong, and I guess I'll count Clash of the Titans just because it's the only movie that's gotten a modern sequel that was like a big stop motion film back in the day, are the only two exceptions. Godzilla would not have continued if it hadn't been for the Suitmation, if it hadn't been for the way that they were able to portray those. And once again, like I was saying with Kong, I do feel that Suitmation pulls off a fluidity to it more so than stop motion ever did or ever will do.
Okay, I'll meet that argument here in a minute, but I just want to point out you just said that Clash of Titans was the only only movie to get a modern remake or reboot or sequel or whatever. So RoboCop, Terminator, did those get a few sequels or reboots?
No,
I don't know.
Hold on. RoboCop, Terminator do not count because Terminator. I'll count Terminator, but RoboCop does not count because the only thing the only thing that is stop motion in that is the robot thing, the ED
Ed 209,
and it looks awful. And it looks awful in the new movie. I will not count that movie because yes, it had stop motion effects, but it was not. Kind of like our original argument for what counts as a giant monster movie. Like, the stop motion effects in that original movie were not the point. And I don't, and they're not that great in the original movie either. So it's using that as an argument is a little flimsy, just because, you're trying to use your grandfather ones, I would assume, which are Kong, Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the big boys.
So what about Empire?
Okay, I would count Empire, but, the thing with Empire is, and I totally...
You've got multiple sequences over multiple Star Wars films in the originals that use stop motion to the exact effect they were going for long sequences.
And here's where my jerkiness argument actually works. Empire, I agree. Yes, the AT-ATs were amazing. However, they were jerky. But the reason why they worked as they were being jerky was because they were a robot. And you allowed it because you were like, oh, well, whatever. It looks really cool. And the jerky movements are obviously just because it's a machine moving through snow. I will give that point is definitely props, but I just feel like it still is jerky. The Rancor is a perfectly good example. The Rancor in Return of the Jedi is stop motion. Guess what it is? It's super jerky.
That is a staple.
The matte effects in that movie are really bad. I'm not talking I know they fixed it in
special
the
editions,
Blu-rays and the special editions, but you go back and watch the original version of that fight versus the Rancor, and the matte effects are so bad. It looks so superimposed in the fight with Luke, and I understand for the time it was amazing, but
both techniques have their little staples of why they don't hold up. I mean,
of course.
You can see some zippers in Doctor Who episodes with Suitmation and that.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely not fighting that they are not both without their flaws. I mean, like I said, especially if you go to the Godzilla series, 60s and 70s Godzilla, some of those suits were pretty bad. Some of the effects were pretty bad.
I think for a while there, they just didn't even care what Godzilla looked like.
Yeah,
they were just big eyes,
Well, and one of the things that Godzilla
suit
had,
hanging off.
One of the things that Godzilla had, and actually this is something that I will give stop motion over Suitmation, is Godzilla, whenever they were trying to do new movies with the Godzilla, they didn't have a lot of money to build a new suit, so they were able to use the same suit. Stop motion, technically, they would use the same puppet, although it had the exact same problem. It was just easier to fix. Stop motion puppets are so small that you're able to go in and tweak little things with them, and it'll look okay on screen. Whereas a Godzilla suit, if it's falling apart at the shoulder, there's really not much you can do other than sew it up and hope for the best.
Okay, well, I would like to go back to your very bold statement that 1954 Godzilla, the effects hold up better than the 33 Kong.
Yes. For the movie, once again, for the story it is trying to tell. That is what I said.
Yes, and I think the best thing that Godzilla has going for it is that Godzilla is this off-in-the-distance giant monster who you see in plenty of close-ups, but for the most part, he's this wrecking force through a city, and he doesn't have to really do all that much. Whereas Kong had to be a character in the film, interacting with the humans regularly. He's almost their size, and climbing buildings and doing so much more action than Godzilla was. So the main thing I want to argue with this point is that what are the point of these special effects even existing? My argument would be that they came into being because the producers of these films, the filmmakers, wanted to create things that you couldn't see in real life. I mean, This is the basis of any special effect.
True.
And which one is more capable of that? My argument is stop motion, because you could literally, whatever your imagination could define, you could create in stop motion. You could create a model, you could manipulate it, you could bring it to life. Whereas suitmation, you're really restricted by what a human can do, what a person could do with that, and the puppetry.
I agree with you on that sense. Suitmation is limited by how a human body can contort, pretty much. It is limited by that. However, I think that filmmaking techniques and stuff similar to that, make that difference up. If you look at Godzilla Raids Again, or Gigantus the Fire Monster, whatever you want to call it, if you go back and actually watch that film, and yes, that film itself is not that great, but the one thing that they do with the Angulus suit in that, or Angulus, whatever you want to call it, once again, what they do with that suit, yes, it is limited because it's a guy basically on, his hands and knees. But what they do by that suit in that movie, and later on they completely ignore this and they don't do it, but in that movie, they always make sure to show it from the waist up. They never show his legs dragging on the ground. Even in the battle scenes between Godzilla and Anguirus, there's never a scene that you see that he is crawling on his knees. And that therefore makes it look like a four-legged creature. It doesn't look like a guy crawling around on the ground like it does in the later films. It looks like an actual creature on all fours attacking Godzilla. Godzilla, of course, is a very humanoid creature. Most of the stuff, like you were saying, they are humanoid creatures. However, I still stand by the fluidity of movement, first of all. Second of all, the spectacle that you can create with a suitmation effect filmed the right way versus a stop motion creature effect that is filmed the right way. I feel like the suitmation actually stands more out in my mind of, one, I know it's a guy in the suit, so I'm like, how in the heck did they make this look real? Two, the stop motion, because it is so small, Beast from 20,000 Fathoms is the one that comes to mind for this point. The puppet is small, right? The puppet is, it's about 12 feet tall, or 12 inches tall. That would be a huge puppet. It's so tiny that everything around it that it interacts with has to be small as well. Like, super small. And so you lose out on a lot of detail. And unlike Godzilla 54 or a giant monster effect, because you're focused on a larger object that is interacting with the smaller objects, the loss in detail isn't as noticeable most of the time. Whenever you're focused on the little tiny Rhedosaurus walking through the city, the buildings on the right and left side of him look very, very, very fake. The creature itself and the movements, like I said, it's jittery, but it looks good. The stuff that he's interacting with or that he's next to, not so much. And I think that's the same problem with Kong. Is yes, there are some great superimposed shots in Kong. And I feel, obviously we're going to have an episode talking about 33 Kong that will go in more detail about this. But there are some things that look really, really awkward, with Kong picking up the girl. Kong picking up, or like interacting with Fei Rei. Like there are some very, effects that don't work, that Godzilla avoided that problem entirely by Godzilla being so huge and not interacting, which is your point that you just made, that's why it's better. Godzilla avoided that problem by saying, oh no, Godzilla is a giant monster. He's not going to interact on the human level with people.
Well, they also avoided that because they couldn't do it.
Well, yeah, once again, budgetary constraints, like I was saying.
No, not budgetary. I mean, like actual technical ability. This is my next point with stop motion, is that the processes of combining these shots in post-production is very different in my research of suit motion, stop motion. They're both rear projection. They're both, using multiple panes of glass and things. But the advantage that stop motion really had over suitmation was suitmation, you were shooting multiple scenes of action and you were combining them in post and hoping they worked because you had, just like any type of filmmaking, live action filmmaking, you have multiple takes and you try to get the best take and then you combine them. Whereas stop motion is more like actual animation, where yes, you have people running around and you have actors acting in the live action parts, but when you combine those shots in post, you're really able to manipulate your stop motion to do whatever you need to, frame by frame. So you can have a hand grabbing someone and it's actually in the right place because you don't have to have some puppeteer doing it live and trying to nail his mark. You can hit the mark scientifically as accurately as possible.
True. I get you there. I definitely get you there. I think... But I think it still looks super awkward. And I mean, there's not really a way to avoid that. It's one of those things like, yes, the technology is there and it is easier for stop motion to do it, but that doesn't mean it's good when it happens.
That's true. But I'm just saying, like, Godzilla avoided that, yes, because he's, 100 meters tall, but also because they couldn't do it with suitmation. It would be too hard to have two live action film sequences interacting with each other, other than Godzilla looking over a mountain or things like that.
I mean, and I know we want to bring up these 2 points, but the Godzilla versus Kong, when Kong does interact with people, they do those shots. I mean, it may look worse, but once again, like budgetary constraints.
That's what I'm saying. Put your Godzilla versus King Kong suitmation effect straight up against 1933 King Kong stop motion, and I guarantee the stop motion will hold up better.
Yeah, but I mean, then again, you take the best of the suitmation for Kong, you take the 1976 Kong, and put it against 33 Kong, and I would say that actually 76 Kong moves like a little bit more fluid and has those interactions with humans, and it's not as big of an eyesore.
Well, that's not fair because I love 76 Kong.
No, I know it's not fair, but but it is suitmation. It's controlled by a puppet. The face is controlled by a puppeteer off stage.
It is.
So it is suitmation.
Although a lot of 76 Kong doesn't count in a lot of ways because the main interaction with humans you see in that film is the hand animatronic and the face animatronic, which weren't suitmation. They were straight animatronics. Right,
but see, that's where we actually get into a not a divide, but we actually run face first into each other, is because suitmation and stop motion are always created with a combination of effects. I mean, there's robotic arms and stuff. I mean, there's the giant goofy robotic Kong in the 1933 Kong that they used for the close-up shots, and the hand shots is a giant robotic hand. So, like it is impossible to talk about one without the other. I think. I mean, if we're talking about the specific effects work of suitmation versus stop motion, I guess we would just have to avoid the robotic scenes at all, like completely.
My challenge to you would be giving you a scene that I think holds up to a lot of modern day effects. Obviously, you're always going to have the problems with post effects in the 70s and 60s and 50s. Mm-hmm. Just in general, like matting two shots together, it just didn't look very good. You're always going to run into that. But I think one scene that really holds the test of time, not Jason and the Argonauts fighting, the skeletons, which is awesome and an iconic scene and amazing, but Clash of the Titans. If you look at the scene where the Medusa fight, where he's down in the caverns, and this is some of the best stop motion that's ever been made. It's incredibly dark, which obviously special effects have been using darkness forever. But what's unique about it is makes it so great is you have a human-sized monster versus a human, and you have suspense, you have building up to it. And when you see Medusa, not only did they do the motion of her to fit in the scene, but you have lighting effects, some of the most advanced lighting effects that's ever been done on stop motion puppetry, where you have the water, you have the lighting that's reflecting off the water hitting her, and then you have the torch fire hitting her at the same time. And these are individual beams of light that had to be manipulated after every frame, and it gives off a water reflection as well as a fire torch at the same time on this puppet that actually you completely buy in that scene is terrifying. It's really amazing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I will bring up a movie that has suitmation in it that stands the test of time and is actually one of the better werewolf transformations ever put into film. And that would be An American Werewolf in London.
Only parts of that count as suitmation.
No, the entire sequence where he is transforming is a suit, and it is being manipulated by puppets off screen. Therefore, it is a suitmation effect.
Well, if I would have known that, I would have never started this episode.
Right? Yeah, no. But I mean, there are those suitmation effects that do stand the test of time. I mean, look at Alien. I brought it up earlier. The alien effect work in that movie, in the original movie, and beyond, of course, is fantastic. And I will never, like, unlike some stop motion, like, you bring up Terminator 1, the effects work in Terminator 1 when it is a stop motion endoskeleton look awful. Like, it's only when they cut back to basically Stan Winston walking around with the Terminator on the top of his head that it looks good. And they do intercut all right, but, like, that's actually why, once again, in Jurassic Park, you brought it up, I'm going to bring it up again. In Jurassic Park, they realized that it was a dead technology as far as they were concerned for what they wanted to do. Creating a live creature in stop motion just was not viable anymore.
Well, see, here's my argument for that is I think we can see today where suitmation has come. You look at the suitmation films that are coming out like today, like you mentioned Where the Wild Things Are, but if you looked at like the new Godzilla or like the new Toho Godzilla when we finally ever see it, we can see where that technology went.
Yes.
Like we can see what it looks like, how it holds up today. And I think that still takes a lot of suspension of disbelief to believe that as a modern technology. Whereas I think if you take the Phil Tippett screen test for Jurassic Park and you see how, I mean, they got really, really close with those. I mean, the Gallimimus running across the screen looks really, really good. It's not as good as the CGI that they eventually settled on.
Yeah, it's still super jerky.
It's not as super jerky as you're making it out. It is not.
Coleman,
it's not Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
No, it's not Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, but it is still obviously a stop motion effect. Like, there is just a way that stop motion effects move that you can automatically determine that is a stop motion effect.
Sure, but my point with this is saying that was in 93.
Yeah.
If this technology had still been, if CGI had never existed and it had continued and been the prominent way to bring these to life, I really think Go Motion would have settled at a place that would be as close, if not right with CGI, as far as general movements and lifelike behavior. Because you would have had this computer scaling and this modeling done. I mean, think of everything we do with 3D modeling and everything today. If we would have had the computers of today doing Go Motion, I think it would have looked incredible.
No, I agree. However, you kind of just almost proved my point. You literally said if these effects had continued, where they haven't. Like, the fact is that stop motion was great, and I will openly admit that I like stop motion. I am fighting against it, but I'm not fighting against it because I don't like it. I'm just fighting against it because I do believe suitmation technically is the one that stands against the times most of the time. I feel, okay, stop motion is gone. It literally is gone. The only time you get a stop motion film nowadays is like an Anomalisa or one of those individual one film that is all stop motion, and that's it. There's never a combination between the effects anymore. There's never anything like that. That literally stopped as of 1993. Once Jurassic Park came out, there's never been another stop motion film. And if there is, please feel free to tell us in the comments, because I will eat my words, that has used a combination of live action actors with stop motion since then. So the fact is it is a dead technology.
I would just like to say, would you like the comments to tell you, or would you like me to tell you right
sure,
now?
Go ahead. If you know of one, go for it.
Okay, so since the Phil Tippett test in 93, here are the films that have used stop motion in conjunction with live action film in a major Hollywood setting.
Okay.
RoboCop 3, Army of Darkness,
whoa,
Prehysteria.
Whoa, we're calling RoboCop 3 a actual Hollywood production here?
Yes, it is. It was done by Phil Tippett.
Yeah.
Army of Darkness came out in 1983. Coneheads, the ending fight of Coneheads, was completely
was that
stop motion.
Mm-hmm.
It was a stop motion fight.
I thought that was CG. I don't know.
The Little Rascals in 1994. I'm trying to just pick the big ones here. Monkey Bone. That was a big Brendan Fraser movie.
Oh, well, yeah.
The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Thank you very much.
What was the stop motion effect of that?
Every single fish in that whole movie was stop motion.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. The Science of Sleep. That was a big Michael Gondry film. A very Harold and Kumar Christmas. I didn't see that one, so I don't know the stop motion in that. And then, of course, Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Well, Star Wars: Force Awakens. Once again, there was one stop motion sequence, and it was used in the background, and it was only for fans to catch. It was not like an actual. What I was talking about, and yes, some of those do fit. So I will eat my words a little bit, but what I'm talking about is like a Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, like a Kong. Like, there's not where that's a primary effect in the film, and that is what they use. Like, none of those films that you listed off, maybe RoboCop 3, I don't know. I will stand by that. I've never seen that movie.
Army of Darkness, I think, is a pretty big one.
Well, but Army of Darkness, did it use mostly stop motion, though?
It used stop motion for the skeletons. Again.
Okay, yeah, I guess, yeah, okay, I'll count that. Yeah, you're right.
And Coneheads.
Yeah, but
the classic.
I do not remember that fight in Coneheads.
It's almost like a Rancor.
Don't remember.
It's like a Rancor fight at the end. Dan Aykroyd fights like an almost Rancor-like monster.
Here's a question for you: how far does that list take you as far as years go? What is the last movie that you see on that list?
2015, Star Wars.
Okay, other than Star Wars.
2014, the late night double feature. I've never heard of it, but
what is that? That is not an Attack on Titan.
This is the Normand Yiend classic. Okay, right. I'm kind of digging myself a hole here.
You are kind of are. My point is that Suitmation is still being used in film today. It will forever be used in film. I do not think that Suitmation will ever go by the wayside. There will always be another Predator movie or a Japanese Godzilla film, as it turns out. I don't think that the Japanese Godzilla films will ever go full CGI. I don't think they will. I think that's so ingrained in their studio's DNA that I think that they will always do something Suitmation in a Godzilla film. I think that stop motion had its time. It was really good for what it was. It evolved. It did evolve. Like you were saying, you didn't want me to bring CG into this because, you could argue that a lot of the stuff in CG was brought from stop motion. I agree. The thing is, though, is it did evolve into something that is almost completely unrecognizable from what it used to be. In 1993 Jurassic Park, they actually created a device so that Phil Tippett would still have a job on that film. They created a device so that he could animate something like it was a stop motion puppet or a go motion puppet as of the time, so that it would translate into the CG effect in the film. They don't do that anymore. That does not exist anymore. That was only used like on Jurassic Park, and I feel like there's probably a couple other ones right after that happened that they used it anyway.
I would argue though that just computer animation doing this frame by frame movement of
like I said, that's
legs,
an evolution.
Everything. It is very, very similar to the technique of.
But I don't think that it's enough of an evolution to count as part of your argument. Just like you were saying that I can't technically count motion capture. Like they are both such an evolution. But the fact is that even without motion capture, Suitmation's still being used, and it still will be used. That's the point I'm trying to make.
So my last point, before our closing arguments, my last point is, which do you think has had the most effect? Which do you think which evolution that we talked about that don't count as the technologies, which one had the broader impact? Because I know we said we weren't going to do this, but if you had to pick between CGI and motion capture, which aids CGI.
Well, I was going to say, that's why this question is unfair and loaded, and I hate you for it. So here's the thing. First of all, I can't say much about motion capture having an impact because we are just now seeing the impact of it. Motion capture really it's a very recent, thing to become so big. Gollum and Lord of the Rings is really where it started. Now we're getting films like Planet of the Apes and stuff like that where they are using those techniques, and now they're being used in video games, and now it's being used everywhere. So I feel like you're right. Technically, if you want to make the argument of that's, stop motion evolved into just CG, the broad term, versus motion capture evolving from Suitmation, yes, technically CG wins that out because without CG there would be no motion capture. However, here's where I'm going to make my argument, is that's technically the exact same thing for Suitmation. And this actually gives you a little point too. Stop motion was the grandfather of effects of creatures or things that could not be shown on film by, I don't know, just having somebody build like a weird box creature. Like it was used and it was very well done. And then because a studio could not do stop motion, they had to create a new technique, which was Suitmation. Suitmation would not exist without stop motion. I agree. But the exact same way of this argument with the motion capture versus CG. Which is more effective is the question that I feel like we were both trying to get at here, is which is more effective at doing what they're doing. Motion capture is more effective than just doing CG by itself. If you take a Gollum from Lord of the Rings and you don't have Andy Serkis doing the movements and the facial animations for it, it would not be as effective of a CG creature as it was with motion capture.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like technically CG is really kind of evolving to become more motion capture centered. And since that's the case, doesn't that mean that motion capture wins by default?
No, because we will not always be talking about humanoid-based creatures.
Yeah, but motion capture has been used for non-humanoid-based creatures.
Of course, but it's still at the end of the day, if I wanted to create some crazy dragon that has no arms and legs and is just insane, that would have to be completely animated from the ground up, which is stop motion.
Fair enough.
Now, do you want to say, just as a olive branch, before we get into our closing arguments, can you think of the perfect film that has combined stop motion and suitmation?
Perfect film.
I've got it ready in my head.
Go ahead.
You mentioned where the wild things are, but
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure where you're going with this. What
John
film?
Carpenter's The Thing.
Perfectly
Complemented stop motion animation, just sparingly, very sparingly, with amazing suitmation effects.
And if it, not talking about the remake, but if the thing had been made today, those little stop motion effects would have been CG, but because of the time it came out, that wasn't a thing.
Yeah, oh my gosh, we could 100% talk about if this were just a general monster podcast, but because it has to do with this topic, the newest thing, the 2011 one with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, have you seen the behind the scenes on that with the original suitmation?
Oh yeah. No.
It's incredible. Yeah. It's amazing. It would have looked incredible on film,
but
and they replaced all of it.
They replaced it with CG, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Horrible.
That's because suitmation also has its limitations. It just like stop motion took too long back in the day and was technically really hard to work with. We're now getting to that point with suitmation where they're like, no, I'd rather just create a CG character, because if you do a suit, I have to film it from this angle and this angle only, or else I'm going to see the other stuff. Like, that's the world we're evolving into nowadays. But anyway.
So, okay, because I got the opening word and I got the first say of this argument, I'll let you have the last closing argument. So I'll start off again for my closing argument.
Sure.
But you can have the last word of the entire Versus episode.
Sure.
So, in conclusion, my main argument for stop motion is, obviously, it's a cultural history. It's a landmark in effects where, at a time where we really shouldn't have been able to show some of these things, we found a way. We found a way to animate real sculptures, put them into a film right next to live action people, and do something that had never been done before, and show these sci-fi concepts and these supernatural elements, I would say well before its time, because of some of these artists. And while I will concede to you that there is always going to be that little jerk to it, there's always going to be that little stutter, I think just like suitmation, it's the personality of the effect that really wins people over. People are always going to go back to Clash of the Titans. They're always going to go back to the 1933 King Kong, and they're going to enjoy these films and buy into them. In my opinion, more so than future generations might be able to go look back at some of these suitmation effects and really buy into them. I think stop motion inherently forces you to suspend your disbelief and buy into it. If you don't, I mean, that's the roll of the dice with any special effect, even modern techniques. But I really believe that stop motion has the personality almost of like a vinyl record to a CD. It has something there that people are going to remember, they're going to be nostalgic about, and they're going to show their kids, and their kids might really dig as well. I remember I was well after the time of Ray Harryhausen, and my dad would show me Ray Harryhausen films, and I'd fall in love with them. I thought they were amazing, and I didn't believe they were real or really happening, but I think the personality of that effect will always be remembered as classic Hollywood and classic filmmaking, and will still be fondly watched. These movies will not be just gestating old think pieces or history, arguments. I think these are films that people are still going to enjoy well into the future, more so than suitmation, in my opinion. As much as I love suitmation, like I said, I mean, some of my favorite films, I would rather they be Suitmation than just throwing a bunch of CGI at the screen. I mean, Suitmation will always look better under practical lighting and things like that. I'm just, for this particular argument, for the testing of time and for some of these films that were made with them, I really think stop motion has a place to not only be remembered, but to be thought of as the granddaddy of technical achievement in this realm, specifically also with giant monsters. When you think of giant monsters, you think of a giant stop motion lizard or a dinosaur fighting. These are what defined the genre and created it. So that's my piece on why I think stop motion should win this argument.
So you brought up a really interesting word choice, and I think I've said it earlier, is that stop motion is the grandfather of special effects. Very, very good word choice. It is the grandfather, and unfortunately, the grandfather has passed away. I'm sorry. He has passed away. I'm very sorry to say it. It's very sad. But the thing is that Suitmation, for every bad Suitmation film, there is a good one. For every bad stop-motion film, there is a good one. It's not arguing about the amount of films. It's not arguing about the quality of individual films and using that as an example. For instance, you can't say that, because Godzilla's Revenge had awful effects, that makes the effect itself bad. I think that Suitmation will stand the test of time even more so than stop motion. Yes, the films that use stop motion back in the day are classics. Kong, Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. And those effects, they are very jerky, but they are looked back fondly by people who watched them when they were younger. I think the same can be said about some Suitmation films. We're a giant monster podcast, so we focus on the giant monsters. But, I've brought up aliens, predators, and all sorts of crazy things in my argument. And they are the films they are the modern day classics. These films are going to be like the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and the King Kong of the next few generations. That's already happening. People born in the 90s are looking back at these films in the 80s as classics. So we are already at that point. Now, do I think that stop motion is ever going to disappear in the sense of people thinking back on it? No. I think that people will go back and watch the original Kong. People will watch those classics like Clash of the Titans and go, oh, wow, those effects are not as bad as I originally thought they would be. People will say the exact same thing for some of the Suitmation stuff that has happened. Like, for instance, like I said, Godzilla's Revenge. I think, though, the Suitmation has evolved to a point and is still being used in the industry today, which therefore automatically gives it a win because it has been the longer lasting special effect technique. Yes, like we said, stop motion was the grandfather. It technically started about, I would almost say, like 100 years, 200 years before. Not 200 years, sorry. 100 years before really Suitmation got to the point where it is as amazing as it is. It's less than that, but I'm just doing funny math in my head. The fact is that Suitmation stood the test of time. It is still standing, whereas stop motion is dead and buried, unfortunately. The Suitmation is still there. So I would argue that Suitmation is the more viable technique into the modern times. It is also has its really, really, really great moments back in the day. Like I said, I will stick by 54 Godzilla's effects being better pulled off than Kong's. That is something I know a lot of people are going to argue with me about. But it is no surprise that Suitmation won when you also look at the fact that stop motion takes so long to do. It just became impractical. Sometimes the stop motion effects in a film would take just as long as a actual full feature film would take to film. In conclusion, I would just say that Suitmation has survived. Stop motion has not. That is pretty much the entire point that I'm trying to make.
I think both are strong arguments. Again, it's not up to us to decide.
Right.
Visit TokyoLivesPodcast.com, and under the episodes tab, you're going to find this episode, Suitmation versus stop motion animation. Go into the comment sections of that post, give us your vote. Tell us why you think one should win over the other. And we're going to tally those up. And here in a week or up until the next episode, we're going to pick a winner. It's going to be completely decided by you guys. And we're going to read some of these comments on the air on why you think one should win over the other. So agree or disagree with us. It's up to you guys. We're not going to pick a winner.
Nope.
It's going to be completely up to you. So I don't know. I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited to see which one wins out, because so far the comments have been a little bit in my favor.
Just a little bit, although...
But I think that might change after the episode.
There was one of the comments that actually was kind of like, it was in your favor at the beginning, and then at the very end, it was more like, well...
that guy just needs to make up his mind. All right.
Yeah, that's true.
Pick a side.
But anyway, and I'll be happy to announce the next episode will be War of the Gargantuas. It is a classic Toho film. I actually have never seen this movie.
Really?
Ever. Never in my life.
Oh.
I've heard so many good things about it. I just never have had an opportunity to watch it. I'm going to sit down and watch it in preparation for the next episode, and I will give you like a fresh set of eyes looking at this. Granted, I've seen clips from it, and I've seen the suits, and I know, the general story, but I have yet to see it in like the actual feature film format.
I mean, of the two of us, you've seen way more of the classic Toho films than I have, so I would have guessed that you've seen that. But I caught it on TV when I was younger.
Yeah, War of the Gargantua is just the one that just like skipped by me. I've seen all the other ones, but
I remember really liking it even before I was into these type of films.
Yeah.
So that's I don't know. It's gonna be really interesting watching it. And I'm not gonna pull punches. I don't want to watch these old films, some of the old Godzilla, some of the original Toho films. I don't want to watch them with I would call them kaiju filters, where you just, I'm gonna buy into them because I like this genre. I want to pick it apart and see how it holds up as a film. Yeah. But like any of our discussions based around films, this isn't going to be just a review where we give it a score out of 5 at the end. We're going to go into the history. We're going to talk about the film. And we're going to talk about it.
Yep. So that's pretty much it. We're going to talk about it. We're not reviewing it. We're going to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. So catch up on that. Find your copy at your local half price books, and and we will have that discussion and that topic coming out soon. But right now, I just want you guys to focus on this one. Leave comments, vote on it. We want to have a clear answer. This is not Batman versus Superman. We're not going to come together at the end and agree that both are awesome. We're going to have a winner of the stop motion versus suitmation.
Although, to be fair, we both kind of agree that they're both awesome in their own ways.
Yeah. But we're not going to say it any more than we already have.
Right.
So thanks everybody for listening. I've really enjoyed this episode. I can't wait to do more of these versus episodes.
Yep. It's going to get some, I got some pretty interesting ones in my head that I can think of that we can get into later.
Especially when we do like a monster versus another monster.
Yeah.
So a matchup that has not been seen on film yet.
Absolutely.
We'll see what we can figure out with that. But anyway, thanks for listening. Jump on iTunes, leave us a review. We desperately need those. We just hit iTunes new and noteworthy, which blew me away. I was super excited about that. Yeah. But yeah, the more reviews we can get on there, the higher we'll rise on that. More people will check out the show, and we'll have more people voting in episodes and talking about these kind of discussions. Yep. So definitely jump on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever. Leave a review. Jump on our website. I really want to pull more people to the TokyoLivesPodcast.com website. I'm trying to post news there every day as much as possible. Whatever news is out there, I'm posting, I'm talking about. And I just love seeing that on that. And I also, a big shout out to the subreddit R Godzilla. It's kind of a catch-all for kaiju Reddit stuff right now, because I don't know, no one goes to R Kaiju or anything like that. So they've been gracious enough to not be deleting my posts when I post the episodes up there. So hopefully that'll stick around. But some of the comments and talk on there has been really great. So thank you, everybody, for supporting us and listening
Definitely.
in.
Yep.
So we will leave you there, and we will let you know when the next episode is coming. But in the meantime, I'm your host, Coleman.
I'm Kyle.
And have a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.